Hello and welcome to episode 98 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm Joe, my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we have quite a bit to talk about. One, the CDL season is finally here. After the longest offseason possibly in professional sports or esports history, we have finally made it to the 2024 CDL season. This weekend is the first weekend of matches of the CDL season. So we'll be giving all of our predictions, and we'll giving away our preseason awards, the guys that we think will win MVP, who will win champs, who will win Rookie of the Year, all of the major awards we will be giving out on this show later in the show. We're also talking about GAs for the second week in a row, because right after we got done with last week's episode, a big old snaking GA and public GA debate went on Twitter, so we have that to talk about. Brice and Tunn made an announcement that they won't be returning to the CDL this year, so we'll talk about that. G2 and version 1, the parent company of the Minnesota RØKKR, they announced that they are entering a quote-unquote strategic partnership, so we'll get into that. And we'll probably talk about some other things as it pops up during the show. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm all right. Like you said, we got a lot to talk about today. Finally, have some actual matches that we can get into very shortly. So I'm not going to keep us waiting. Let's get this show on the road.
Let's start with the snaking GA thing, because that is a follow-up from last week. We had a pretty long debate, or not necessarily a debate among us, but we were having a conversation about GAs, the validity of them, and specifically snaking. We've talked about that quite a bit, considering it's been a major point of contention in MW3 so far. But after the show last week, there was a lot of debate, or a lot of arguments going on around the CDL community that snaking has to go. And there was a public GA vote taking place that essentially GA'd snaking among CDL pros, at least for the time being. I just want to get your thoughts initially on this, because we've talked about it before, how we can kind of GA certain things. Guns, it's easier to GA that, and it's easier to police that. But when you're in a round 11, when you're in a critical moment, players are probably still going to snake, and they're going to do what they have to do to win and to get the money, get the prizes and everything. So what are your initial reactions to this public GA of snaking?
I mean, I think the coolest aspect of this is the public component, right? Like, obviously, in years past, we heard about GAs through, like Crone or other avenues, but and it was all seemingly done in a group chat that's alluded to when people are talking on streams and whatnot, but it was never a public vote like this. Now, the one caveat to this situation is, are votes being changed because they are public and not behind closed doors? Because it was seemingly unanimous in almost a lot of these conversations when the vote was public, but I don't think that was necessarily the case in the private chat. Obviously, I don't know for sure because I wasn't there, but or it's either that was the case, or just the votes like this weren't actually happening, or it was like, lost in organization of a group chat, whatever the case may be. The public component is cool, especially if you have these teams agreeing to it now, and now we get into this first week of matches, or even later down in the season, and players are breaking certain GAs, then that if all the teams are agreeing to it publicly, as opposed to not being sure which teams might have voted for what and or against what, now we kind of know where everyone's mindset is, and like you kind of alluded to with snaking in particular, there was like a clip of Clay doing snaking in a scrim right after the public vote, and like him saying that it's a hard habit to break and stuff, especially after so many years now of doing it consecutively. That might be a little bit of a, you have to have some wiggle room in that regard, as opposed to something like a setting that if you're turning off sound EQ, for example, like that's a setting that you turn off and forget about it, right? Like if somebody leaves that on, it's intentional, or the settings were somehow changed by the game, which that's happened to me. But for regardless of the specifics, it's just the public component of this GA situation is definitely interesting, and we'll just have to see once these matches start up later this week who's holding to everything, and hopefully, especially in regards to snaking and some of the other more pressing matters that have been addressed by GAs, hopefully just the teams are keeping up their end of the bargain so that they produce the best product for fans at the end of the day, because not only are the GAs intended to make the game as competitive as possible and to uphold competitive integrity, but it's also to produce a solid product for fans. So that's at least in my eyes, that's at the end of the day, I really, in terms of GAs, I just want to see the best version of the game that we can get out of whatever product is handed down by Activision that year. So in this case, hopefully, there aren't any major issues, and this first set of matches is clean, and we don't have any debates about somebody accidentally snaked twice here and that stuff, which I'm sure that'll inevitably happen at some points in the season, and might lead to some good conversation and banter. But there is also supposedly a nerf to snaking coming in the season 1 update to MW3 tomorrow. We've talked about this. We talked about what patch the CDL players will be playing on, and us being unsure and assuming that because the season 1 update is tomorrow, that these first set of qualifiers will probably be played on the season 0 patch as opposed to season 1. We don't know that for sure, but if there is a nerf to snaking, then potentially that it might be something that the GA is revisited. But at the end of the day, even if snaking is somewhat possible to some extent, these pros are going to find a way to push the limits and stretch it as far as they can in terms of what they're able to do. And so the nerf might not really matter for competitive at the pro level, but it might matter for challengers and pub matches and all that stuff. So we'll have to see after the update tomorrow if the changes are actually significant.
That's a good point about it being a bigger effect on challengers than it would be in the CDL, because GAs just by their nature are a lot easier to police when you're in a smaller group. There are only 48 starting players in the CDL. There are hundreds, maybe even thousands of challengers players. So it's almost impossible for these GAs to be in effect in the challenger scene, which is the sentiment that I saw among challengers players that I follow on Twitter, that it's cool and all to have these public GAs, like no snaking, no ATS, no sound EQ, but all of that is essentially legal, and it's a Wild West in challengers. So there's nothing that these players can really do about it outside of the CDL, which is important to remember. I want to go over these GAs real quickly just to update the people on what is actually GA'd now according to these last round of public GAs. So all snipers are GA'd, which we talked about on maybe the last episode or 2 episodes ago, that we both wanted snipers in because that's kind of COD in its essence, especially in Search and Destroy. So all snipers are GA'd. Snaking is GA'd. ATS and single tap sprint GA'd. Loudness, equalization, or sound EQ GA'd. And then we have the existing GAs of pistol attachments, high grain ammo, muzzles that increase melee damage, the MTZ, the knife, which is the combat knife, and the karambit. ARs must use a red dot sight. So either the slate reflector or the Mark III reflector. The SAE kill streak is also GA'd, and then teams are maxed out at 2 trophies per team and 1 smoke in search per team. I know I threw that a lot of information right out there, but I think in general these GAs are a good thing. These are helping the community in some way. Whether they're followed or not is kind of up for debate. The things that will be followed, I'm sure, are like no MTZ, because that's just opening, like if you use the MTZ, someone else on the other team is making an MTZ class between maps. Maybe during the map, someone is making their class right then and right there. Same with like high grain ammo. But something like snaking can be policed to a certain extent until it really matters. Sound EQ, no idea how that. I don't think it really matters on LAN. So the online matches, the qualifying matches, that's going to be more of an issue. But at the same time, we saw with what was it, Boston and Minnesota last season, that Boston essentially didn't want to agree to the sound EQ GA, so that was allowed. So there's a lot of things that can happen with these GAs, and I'm sure a lot will change as teams get into these official matches, into the and of course once we get to LAN, things might change there as well, and we might have some big patches coming up that can address some of these needs, and maybe the GAs won't be as necessary, but it's an important conversation that is being had, and it will probably be talked about quite a bit for the rest of the season if I had to imagine. Next thing on the docket is Brice and Tunn. They announced this week that they will not be a part of the CDL talent lineup for this upcoming season. They said that they had been in communication with Activision, and they were eventually told later last week that they would not be re-signed and they would not be a part of the broadcast crew this coming season, which I think is pretty crappy, that they were under the impression that they were always going to be coming back, that they were going to be part of the team for the season, and it did not happen. Your thoughts on one of the 3, maybe 4 broadcast teams not returning for the new season?
Yeah, obviously, first and foremost, we want to wish Brice and Tunn the best in whatever they're able to do in the future. And, I don't think in their announcements, like they said, they're moving on or anything. Like we had Lando effectively retiring from casting earlier this year. I don't think that's the case with Brice and Tunn, but obviously whatever they decide to do, whether they're back in COD or not, wishing them the best. But that is, the bigger picture thing outside of, the circumstances regarding when they were told and how close to season they were told, is we're now less than we're 3 days away at the time of recording from the CDL 2024 season starting, and we are without 3 of the 8 casters that we had last year. So yeah, 'cause now it's Merc and Maven, who they haven't been doing online matches in 2 years now, I believe. Maybe it's only last year, but I feel like it's been 2. Chance and Miles, obviously, and then it was Study and Lando and Brice and Tunn. There were some challengers, people who would fill in occasionally for some of the online matches, but now we're very close to the official start of the season, and we don't know effectively half or close to half of the talent lineup for who's casting, and we don't even know where to watch the matches officially. So, running out of time for the CDL to give us that information, and don't know when it's going to come at this point.
Yeah, it's a bad sign for the CDL in general, or COD Esports in general, when you don't have information that is crucial to building a fan base, to getting viewership, to just promoting your league in general. That is really disappointing and really concerning in general. With Brice and Tunn specifically, it is really, really messed up that it was, and they've done this before, that I think it was Maven had talked about how they had been negotiating their contracts like almost like a week or 2 before the start of last season or 2 seasons ago. And then they finally came to the agreement that they would only be doing majors and they wouldn't be doing any of the online matches. And that's just poor planning. That's just being disorganized, because if you compare it to professional sports, Joe Buck knows that he's going to be on Monday Night Football well before the season opener. It is not a debate about where he's going to be come the first week of September. Gus Johnson, he knows where he's going to be when it comes time for basketball season or football season. These guys know, because that's what professional organizations do. They line these things up well in advance. They make sure that they have their top broadcasters. They have multiple broadcasters. They have multiple teams in case of an emergency. I I just think it's really, really screwed up, and I wish the best for Brice and Tunn, because it's just a really crappy situation overall, and they definitely deserved better than this. As far as the CDL goes, I have no idea what they're going to do with the casting pairs, because you had mentioned it a while ago, but maybe after Lando had announced that he wasn't coming back, maybe they would promote Nameless to a caster, and they put Nameless and Study together because they've been friends for years, and Nameless has been on the desk for a number of years, doing analyst work for the CDL. So maybe he can make that step up into commentary. We do have challengers guys that can obviously fill that role if needed, but we've heard nothing from them. We've heard nothing from the CDL in general. So just really bad overall. I think the pressure, the sentiment around the CDL season has been as negative as ever, probably. Of course, this is only like the 5th season, so that's maybe not saying the most, but in 5 seasons, I don't think people have been as negative about an upcoming season as they are with this one, specifically around the broadcasting side of things and the format with challengers announcing the challengers report that they're only going to have at most 3 challengers events this season. I think that was according to the rotation. So a lot of things are happening where essentially every bit of news that comes out, people get more annoyed at that piece of news and at the league and Activision as a whole every single time. And obviously that's not good. That's not something that you want heading into what is essentially a pretty important season, I would imagine, for the future of the league and the future of the esport. So yeah, I don't know if you had any other thoughts on that before we move on.
I was going to bring up the Nameless thing just because I can't remember if I actually talked about it on the podcast. I might have been talking to you and Shummer about it when we were playing GBs the other night. But that is something, I think that's more of a long shot. I think ideally some of the challengers, casters would get an opportunity. I honestly think the desk last year with Puckett, Alley, and Nameless was pretty solid, so I don't know if they'd want to break that up. But I thought it would just be pretty cool, and I like I said, I think that's a long shot. But having Nameless and Study cast together would just be kind of funny for longtime COD players, longtime COD fans too. They were a part of that Team Envy squad who got second at COD Champs and Ghosts, and they played together probably, I don't know off the top of my head, but they played together in their professional career. So to have them reunited as a duo on the desk or on the broadcast would be kind of cool. And there have been times they've been on the desk at the same time as well. So that was kind of just a shot in the dark prediction, not something with any insight or whatnot, but it would be kind of fun to see. But yeah, we'll just have to wait, and by Friday we should have an idea of who's casting these matches, because there's 3 matches on Friday, and Miles and Chance aren't going to do all 3. So you would assume Miles and Chance do one, Study and his new duo will be doing another, and then a third question mark duo will be doing the other one.
That's what you think. That's what they want us to think. Next thing up, we have version 1 and G2. Version 1 announced today that they are entering a strategic partnership with G2 Esports, a quote in which V1 ownership will become G2 shareholders, and G2 will receive operating rights to the Minnesota RØKKR Call of Duty League team. Going forward, the version 1 brand will no longer be fielding competitive teams or active in content creation. So this is something that we have talked about as a rumor or a report for pretty much the entire summer. We didn't know when it would eventually happen, but it turns out the week of the CDL opener, Minnesota is the RØKKR is still existing, but version 1, the parent company of the RØKKR, no longer exists. Essentially that G2 Esports is now operating the Minnesota RØKKR, and the V1 ownership, as far as we know, has kind of bought into G2 and is now their shareholders in G2 Esports. I think it's an interesting move. It at the moment, it seems like the RØKKR brand will continue to exist, but as I said before we went live, I thought if this is indeed the final season of the CDL, which I fully expect it will be, as like this franchise league in this current format, I fully expect it to be the final season. That's just a feeling. But if it is, then if G2 is also committed to Call of Duty Esports even after the CDL, then G2 would be around for next season, or whatever next year. Then you would probably have Optic and 100 Thieves and FaZe and maybe NYXL, Oxygen Esports, Heretics, Luminosity, and so on and so forth. It would kind of depend on what happens with all of these teams and how committed they are to Call of Duty Esports, or if they're willing to just get out of the CDL and COD Esports as a whole once the league does change or die or whatever you want to say. So any thoughts that you haven't given already on this Minnesota G2 stuff? Because we've talked about it, we've hinted at it for literally 4 or 5 months, pretty much since the end of the 2023 season. So do you have any kind of final thoughts as we wrap up this Minnesota RØKKR version 1 saga?
No, just the only thing was one of the original reports back in August on this potential merger. I believe the quote was from Barrett Diamond to Dexerto or to Jacob Hale. I don't remember if it was actually in the report or whatnot. But I'm already messing up where I was. Oh, here it is. Brett Diamond provided a statement to Dexerto that nothing is changing for the upcoming CDL season, but this could change before the 2025 season that follows. So that was the one thing we had discussed previously. That second half of that sentence wasn't a quote, by the way, just the nothing is changing for the upcoming season. But regardless, that was the one thing we had discussed previously about this potential merger. And now that it's official, was that the Minnesota, for a team that wasn't really involved in Call of Duty before this CDL era, they really have done a good job with their brand and what they present on socials, and that team behind the scenes, and they have their home series and the watch parties and stuff like that. So it would have been kind of, at least in my eyes, would have been a little disappointing if this merger went through and it was just like Minnesota G2, for lack of a better example. But if they just got rid of the RØKKR brand and completely disowned that with a merger. But glad it's sticking around for now. Obviously, we don't know what the future holds, but we are guaranteed at least one more season of the RØKKR brand. So that's the big takeaway from this merger in my eyes. And also, it is kind of cool to have G2 back in Call of Duty. They were briefly in Call of Duty during Black Ops 4. They actually were in IW too. I'm looking it up. I remember
Chino's team, right?
Spacely, Chino, Accuracy, and Legal. And then their team that they tried to qualify for the CDL Pro League with was Blast, Chino, Decimate, Lacefield, and Methods. And I think they lost. I'm gonna look now before I say. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, they lost a Game 5 round 11 to Red Reserve, where I believe Rated had the Annihilator one-shot specialist pistol, and he got multiple kills with it in the round 11. That's not a qualification match. Where would it be?
Yeah, it's
There's in the losers bracket, Red beat G2 the round before a qualification match. So yeah, that must be what I'm remembering.
Yeah, they definitely had some bad luck with it. That both times that they've tried to kind of get involved and be a part of the COD community, they have picked up rosters that have fallen just short of what they've really needed to do. I think Liquid did the same thing in Black Ops 3. They tried to get into the CDL or in the CWO. I think it was with Merc and TP, if I'm not mistaken. And then things didn't go. I thought it was it not?
I think it was Merc and Apathy.
Maybe I'm getting my old COD pros.
TP would have been on Envy in Black Ops 3, I believe.
Okay. I'm definitely getting these old COD pros mixed up in my old age. So it's Burns, Merc, Study, and Apathy was the Liquid BO3 roster, and they ended up not qualifying for the CWL. They ended up placing. So the qualification process was. So the teams that did qualify: Cloud9, H2K, which was Fears, Fizzerp, Legal, and Lacefield. The Dream Team, which was Diabolic, Sender, Chino, and Killa, and King Papey, which was Nelson, Johnny, Examples, and Royalty. So a lot of throwback names here. And CLG, Liquid, C9 Eclipse, which was DDoS, Silly, Swarley, and Assault's team, and TK did not qualify. Just a lot of throwback org names that just ended up failing to get into the CWL the first time, which was a very weird time in COD Esports. But getting back to what I was actually saying was the G2 stuff. G2, I think it would be interesting if they decide to stick around and really commit to COD Esports. If it's the CDL next year or it's something different, I would love for them to stick around and kind of stake their claim and try to be a part of the community for a long time. Same with all of these other esports organizations that are currently involved in the CDL. It would be cool if they would just stick around and kind of build up their brands, but we have a whole season to get through before we really get to any of that. So let's get into it, shall we? Do you want to start with the awards, or do you want to start with the qualifier pick'em?
Awards.
All right, so before we do our predictions for the week 1 matches, we're going to each give our predictions for these awards or these titles, essentially. So we're going to pick the champs winner. We're going to pick the season most valuable player, the season rookie of the year, our dark horses, which we're saying the team that we think actually could win the championship that is not the New York Subliners, Atlanta FaZe, Optic Texas, or the Toronto Ultra. And we are also making our prediction for which team will make the first roster change of the 2024 CDL season. So let's start at the bottom, actually. Which team do you think will be the first team to change up their roster, whether that be benching someone and then bringing someone up from their substitutes, or signing a player to become a starter?
Yeah, I kind of took the cop-out answer for this one, but I'm going with Miami. I think that's the most logical answer, simply because, for one, we don't officially know their starting lineup yet. There have been reports of Journey being benched or starting in challengers, and then reports of Eric Boom potentially starting in challengers now. So we don't even technically know their roster, but we do know they have a 5-man squad, and they could be, interchanging players. So I feel like Miami is a safe bet, simply because of that aspect of, we know they have 5 players signed, and since we don't actually know their roster, it could be very easy for them to make a very quick change.
Yeah, I went with Boston because they are the only other team to have an actual substitute on their roster. They signed Pentagram this week as their official CDL substitute, and Boston has in the past made some interesting decisions regarding their roster, whether it's benching someone for their Boston Academy team, which I think they're probably going to field an Academy roster again. So that always leaves open the possibility for one of those players, maybe not even Pentagram, but one of those players coming into the starting lineup early in the season if they struggle. Capsidal previously was benched by Boston in his rookie season. Snoopy has played very little time with the Breach, even though he did seem impressive at Champs when he made his debut. So I'm going to go with Boston, but it really could be a few teams. I think LAG is a decent example, because there was a lot of kind of indecision, or a lot of question about which roster they would go with to start this season. And they have some unproven players, like Estrio is making his CDL debut. Fame has not had a ton of time in the CDL. Diamond Con has been in and out, and Assault has also been in and out. And there's always the chance that they will bring up a Challengers player, because their Challengers coaching staff, or their CDL coaching staff, is very connected to the Challengers scene. But so I'm going with Boston. You're going with the Heretics. Let's give our dark horse predictions. So again, no New York, no Atlanta, no Optic, and no Toronto for this pick. I am going with the Seattle Surge. I have been on the Surge bandwagon at times, but this is a completely new Surge lineup. No Pred, no Sib, no Accuracy, no Mac. But I still think this roster has a ton of potential. To remind people, Seattle Surge's new roster this season is Abuza, who will be making his CDL debut, Arcides, who's coming from LAG, Ook, who ended the season with Optic, and Illy, who ended the season on Optic's bench, and Rambo is their head coach. You got, 3 world champions on this roster, and Abuza, who has been hyped up as one of the better challengers players over the last few years. So I'm going to go with Seattle. Who are you picking as your dark horse champion?
Going Carolina. We've talked about this Carolina squad multiple times over multiple episodes since the lineup was rumored and announced. I'm really excited about GodRx being back in the league, and you're a big fan of Clay. I'm a fan of Clay as well, and I got 2 rookies on that squad too. So I think there's some good potential here, and I feel like I haven't really watched too many of Clay's streams or the streams of scrims, but I feel like I've been seeing some decent results and like the screenshots and whatnot. So, not to solely base this on scrim results because that would be dumb, but regardless, I think Carolina has a shot of turning some heads, and I do think for a squad that was put together later in the offseason than some of these other teams that they have a decent shot to be a true dark horse and cause some chaos in the standings.
Next one, Rookie of the Year. Last year was Scrap, and he was a pretty obvious pick for that award. There are a few rookies to start this season. Estriel is one. Purge is another for Vegas. A lot of the I don't know if all of the Heretics guys, I don't know if they're considering CW or CDL, but if Eric Boom were to come into the lineup, then he would be there. Linz has never played in the CDL before, but my pick is going to be Abuza, who, if Seattle does end up being a contender this year, which who knows, I think there's a lot of potential. Like I said, I think Abuza will be one of the best rookies, if not the best. And I think he probably has the best chance to kind of make a statement and be one of those impact rookies like we saw with Scrap last year, or even Hixie last year to a certain extent, or Ghosty as well. But there are a lot of options, but I'm going with Abuza. Who are you going with for Rookie of the Year?
I'll take Snoopy. I like the concept. I think when we were talking about Boston earlier in the offseason, I like the concept of Boston holding on to Snoopy and bringing in a veteran to kind of show them the ropes and form the squad around them. We had talked about it potentially being Clay. Obviously, that's not what happened, and they landed on Slasher, who is another extremely talented veteran, and they also were able to get Priesta coming off a world championship season with New York. So I like the potential that Boston has, and I think if Snoopy just got that brief glimpse of him at champs, but if he's able to build on that and even learn from some of his veteran teammates now, that he has the potential to have a strong rookie campaign.
I think we should mention it because Crone had tweeted it. The odds for Rookie of the Year, to kind of get an idea of who are the favorites, at least according to Bet365. Rookie of the Year odds right now. So Snoopy is the odds-on favorite right now. So if you bet $10, you would make 25. Abuza is in second, Linz in third, Gwyn in fourth, Real in fifth, Purge in a pretty distant sixth, and in a very distant seventh, Estriel. So if you bet $10 on Estriel to win Rookie of the Year, you would make $510 if he won. So I mean, if you're a fan of very low kind of low risk, high reward, well, $10 might not be super low risk, but if you just want to throw $1 or $2 on Estriel to win Rookie of the Year, you could have the opportunity to make a lot of money. But I thought that should be mentioned just to kind of get a gauge of who are the favorites going into the first week of the CDL. The last two, MVP and the champions, the winners of the 2024 CDL Championship. Let's go with MVP first, the season MVP, not champs MVP. I think we've had some really, really good players over the past few years. Shotzi was MVP. Simp won an MVP. I believe Beezy won as well. Celium won 2020, 2021, 22. And who won last? Celium won last year, right? So I'm missing 1 year of the CDL, if I'm not mistaken. Because
No,
I thought,
2020, 2021, 2022.
and then 2023, we just got done with one. So shouldn't, I think
Oh,
Celium won the last season's MVP.
the Celium won 2020. No, Hydra.
Oh yeah, Hydra. Okay, so let's start from the top. Shotzi won in 2020, then Simp, I believe, won in 21, Celium in 22, and Hydra in 2023. Obviously, incredible players. All of them have I think, really have a great chance at winning another MVP this year. Who are you going with for your 2024 CDL season MVP pick?
I'm going with Cell. You can do 2 phase up. I think, the narrative around snaking and everything, he's going to be out to prove some people wrong. Not like he needs any more added motivation because I think he's incredibly talented. And I also just think in the current meta, obviously things could change over the course of the season, but as of right now, which is when we're picking this MVP, it's a very AR favored meta. So, I think Celium's probably the best AR in the game. And if the AR is going to be dominant, then picking the best AR is the preseason MVP prediction only makes sense in my eyes.
I am gonna go with Pred. It's a tough pick because it's this happens every year. We're essentially trying to predict which team is going to be very good and which player is going to be the best on that very good team. If you look at the winners of the MVPs over the years, no player has won the MVP on a team that did not finish at least in the top three. I believe top three at the end of the regular season. Hydra was on a third place team heading into champs last year. Of course, Simp and Celium were both on first place teams in the regular season. And Shotzi, when he won in 2020, he was on the second place Dallas Empire. So no, if you're outside of the top three, of course, this could change. There could be a fourth or fifth place player to do that, but we've seen it in professional sports that it's usually the best player on the best team, more cases than not. I think that'll probably continue. So I kind of have to eliminate most of the field because I don't think that they're going to be in that top four, and probably not in that top three. So that really narrows it down, and I think Optic is going to be really good this year. They have an incredible roster. It's hard to pick against a FaZe guy, but there's obviously the real chance that someone like Draza or someone like Abizi might win their first MVP, or maybe even Sib on New York. But I'm gonna go with Pred. I think he's gonna have another incredible season, kind of a bounce back year, more from a team perspective because personally and individually he was very good last year for Seattle. But I think he's gonna take another step up and he'll win MVP this coming season. And the final pick that we have is for the CDL champions. Possibly, if my prediction is correct, it would be the final. At least this iteration of the CDL would be the last winners. The season 5 winners of champs. It's going to be difficult, but I'm going to go with FaZe. I've strayed away from them at times, and it's kind of bitten me from time to time. But they have an incredible roster. Maybe the best roster that they've had so far in the CDL, and that's saying something considering how dominant they were and how dominant in the regular season they've been throughout the entire CDL's existence. But I think FaZe is going to be the champions at the end of the season. Who are you going with?
Yeah, I mean, if we were doing this, if we were playing this and allowing us to have the same answers, I would inevitably go with FaZe. But for the sake of the exercise and not having the same answers, I'm going to go with Toronto. Toronto was in the finals of champs last year, and they made a player swap to get Envoy in for Hixie. And, although Hixie was crucial to Toronto's end of season success, I think, Envoy does a good job of filling a same role as him and doing it better. Just, Envoy's a world champion, so saying Envoy is better than Hixie, I don't think is a controversial take, and I just think it's an upgrade in this sense. So if Toronto was in the championship with that squad last year, then they make an upgrade. It's not a far-fetched notion to think they had the shot to take the title home this year. So I really like that squad. I'm looking for them to do big things, and I'll go with Toronto for the sake of this. But just know I would also pick FaZe if we were doing the same answers.
Yeah, I don't think you can go wrong at all with any of the top four. It seems to me, at least, that there's a very clear top four in the CDL this season. At least right now. Maybe things will change as we get into the year. But Atlanta, Optic, New York, and Toronto seem very clearly the four best teams and with the four best odds to win champs this year. So I think if you picked any of those four for any reason, that would seem very plausible and very realistic to me. So I don't have a problem with Toronto at all. They got the champs last year, and Scrap's rookie season and Hicksy's rookie season, adding Envoy might be the icing on the cake, might be able to put them over the top. All right. It has been enough time. Let's talk about predictions. We have been waiting all off season to make predictions because Bink beat me by like 4 or 5 points last year. So we did it, I think, all but like a part of the major one qualifiers. We did not do it because we had a weird little break near like around the holiday part. But now we're back. We're gonna do predictions every single week that we have matches. There's going to be a lot more qualifying matches this season, not as many major matches, but we will be making predictions every single week that there are matches, and hopefully I will beat Bink. I don't know if I've ever beaten him. I know we did predictions 2 seasons ago as well, but I don't remember it. I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, so I certainly wouldn't remember if I beat you in some pick'em 2 years ago.
I won. Don't worry about it.
All right, I think I won. So
No.
Bink is lying to the people right now. Let's get into the predictions. We will, as always, go through each match. We have 3 on Friday, 4 on Saturday, and 4 on Sunday. I think it's 7 total matches throughout the qualifying period for each team. So there's going to be quite a bit to predict, but this week we have these, I think 11 matches is my quick math. So Friday, December 8th, we don't know where it will be streamed, but it might not be streamed. It might just be like an old timey, like we'll have like a radio and we sit by it and we hear the results or something. But Friday, December 8th, we will have some matches in the CDL. The first of which will be the Atlanta FaZe versus the Boston Breach. I think we're probably going to lean toward the Atlanta FaZe. Are you agreeing with my FaZe pick?
I am. I'm going with FaZe, but it is definitely worth mentioning. First match of the season, a revenge match for Slasher. We know how much the narrative of revenge matches seemingly go in favor of the person who was dropped or left the team to go to a new home and whatnot. So should be some banter. Will be Draza's debut, obviously, for FaZe, and we're both thinking FaZe on this one, and should be a good one regardless.
Next, LAT versus the Seattle Surge. Completely new rosters for both of these teams. A new coach for the Surge. Really no idea what either of these teams actually look like heading into the season. I'm going to go with the Seattle Surge, though. They're my dark horse pick. I have no idea how these teams will kind of kick off the season, if it'll take a little bit longer to get into the swing of things, but I'm going to go with the Surge. How about you?
I'll take the Thieves. I feel like they have some solid potential, and like you said, we don't really know what to expect from either of these squads. At least I certainly don't. So I'll go with the Thieves here.
And the match of the day, for sure, Optic versus the New York Subliners to finish out on Friday. I'm going to go with New York because, while I think Optic really does have a lot of potential and I think they might be the best roster in the league, New York has to be in that conversation as well. And New York only made one change, where Optic, they replaced half their roster, even though it's probably an upgrade on their part. I just think like early part of the season, I wouldn't be surprised if Optic struggles to, kind of get their feet under them immediately. And New York is obviously the world champions for a reason. I would expect them to be very, very good right out of the gate. So I'm going to go with the Subliners.
Yeah, I'm going with New York too. I think I had the similar mindset of the fact that, New York's the defending world champions, although they did make a roster change. Can't really bet against them until we see more. So I'm thinking New York here. It is definitely worth mentioning, though, too. This is the first time we're going to see Pred versus Sid, since for their first 2 years in their CDL careers, they were on the same team. So that's definitely an interesting storyline to keep an eye on in this match, and could lead to some solid banter post game, too. So excited for that one, but I'm going to go with New York. Definitely think this is going to be a close one, though, and could go either way, 100%.
4 matches on Saturday, December 9th. The first, Carolina versus Miami. The new look Florida team, formerly the Mutineers. Last year, the Miami Heretics. This year, the Royal Ravens relocating from London to Carolina to Charlotte. So that, these debuts for the new brands and stuff. It's going to be interesting. Obviously, both teams, we've never really seen them in the CDL. Obviously, the Heretics guys have been around for quite a few years, but they've been out of the CDL for the most part, aside from Vickel, who is not an OG Heretics player. And then the Ravens starting 2 rookies, and Goderex making his return to the CDL, and then Clayster coming back after a season in Vegas. I'm going to go with the Heretics. I think the chemistry could help in that these guys have essentially known that they were going to be on a team together for months and months, even before the last CDL season ended, or had an inkling that that was going to happen. And I just think having 2 rookies kind of start off against Miami might be a little too much. But it is Spanish versus Spanish. Real, a Spanish player going up against his fellow countrymen in his first match, which is kind of cool. So who are you going with, Carolina or the Heretics?
I got to go with Carolina. I picked them for my dark horse, so I'm not picking against them in their first match, let alone one here. Against 2 teams that are probably in the lower half of the power rankings in many people's eyes. So I'm gonna go with Carolina.
Next, Vegas versus Minnesota. This one was kind of difficult to even think about because we have Attach. He's possibly in a revenge game against the RØKKR. Standy, formerly another RØKKR player, going up against his old team. I don't know if there's any more revenge games at stake here, but I have no idea how these teams are going to work. Never really seen Purge aside from the Challengers finals last year. Never seen Lins aside from like maybe 1 or 2 scrims. So it's kind of hard to kind of even conceptualize what these teams are going to look like when they actually get in the server. But I'm going to go with Vegas. I think that roster is actually pretty decent. Minnesota is around the same area, the same tier, I would imagine, with Vegas, or somewhere close. So it's kind of a toss up for me. So who are you going with?
Yeah, definitely a toss up for me too, and I'm gonna go with Minnesota. Don't really know what to expect from either of these teams, but especially in the current state of the meta and the power of ARs, I wouldn't be surprised to have a pop-off big weight game to start the season where he just hard carries. So that's what I'm banking on, and I'm going to take Minnesota here.
Next, we have the Toronto Ultra versus the Los Angeles Guerrillas. A lot of people will be interested in this first match, see if Vios and his LAG squad are as good as I don't even think people are expecting them to necessarily be very good, but people are just waiting to kind of dunk on him, I would assume, or just make some really poor taste takes on Twitter. But I'm going to go with Toronto. I don't think that you could really pick the Guerrillas. Toronto coming off of a champs grand final last year. Definitely a lot of motivation there. LAG, this is a pretty inexperienced roster, all things considered. Some rookies. Estro's a rookie, and you have some guys that don't really have even more like. I think DiamondCon maybe has 1 year total experience in the CDL because he's kind of been up and down between rosters. But yeah, so I'm going to go with Toronto. Who are you going with?
Yeah, Toronto, set it and forget it. I think this might be a quick 3-0, and we might get some scrappy yawning or sleeping, or I thought it was Pred who did the sleeping, but we might get some scrappy trash talk too, especially if it's a quick 3-0, but definitely going Toronto here.
Last match on Saturday, Seattle versus Boston. I'm going to go Seattle on this one. I I have no idea how either of these teams are going to play, as is the case with any new roster. We say it after midseason roster changes, and we say it at the beginning of the season. So we're kind of just going on paper, and I think Seattle on paper has a better roster. Whether that actually turns out to be the case, we'll see come Saturday evening. But I'm going to go with the Surge on this.
I'm taking Boston. You know, again, not really sure what to expect from either squad just yet, but I feel like I gotta think Boston here and just what I'm feeling, so I'll take them.
Final matches of the weekend, Sunday, December 10th, starting off with the Las Vegas Legion versus the Carolina Royal Ravens. So Clayster revenge game at stake here after they apparently lowballed him in the negotiations. Maybe a theory revenge game as well. So he's going to be cooking up some strats after saying that Clayster lied or was trying to attention seek or whatever on Twitter in the offseason. So we got a lot at stake here. But I'm going to go with the Las Vegas Legion. I think this is another toss-up. I would put both of these teams in that lower, like the bottom 8, and I'm not really sure where exactly these teams would kind of be in relation to each other. So I'm going to go with the Legion.
Hey, you're the Vegas is winning champs crew.
So they are going 0-2 this week for sure because I picked them.
I'm gonna go with Carolina here, and I'm thinking the same thing. I got Carolina going 2-0. Then they go 0-2. I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, they both Vegas and Carolina cannot both go 0-2 this week. I don't think. Maybe if the server crashes and I don't know, maybe Jimbo logs into one of the Vegas guys' accounts. Maybe they'll just give Vegas and Carolina the loss there. I don't know. Next match, New York versus LAG. Again, New York. I can't pick against the world champions, against possibly the worst team in the league. So going to go with the Subliners here.
Same.
Next, the Los Angeles Thieves versus the Atlanta FaZe. This is a world championship rematch from 2 years ago, but there are no world champions on the LAT roster anymore. But a draw's a revenge game at stake, and that seems like too good to pass up. So I'm going to go with FaZe.
I'm taking FaZe too.
And the last one, we might be witnessing a breakdown. Who knows? Accuracy versus Optic. No Scump, though, so maybe that won't work out the same. But Optic versus the Minnesota RØKKR in the final match of the week. I'm going to go with Optic to say that they're going to go 1-1 this week, but there's a very good chance that they go 2-0.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Optic too, and I'm glad you brought up the accuracy. Him being back on Minnesota against Optic, that's definitely got to bring up some scary memories for the Green Wall, and I'm sure that will be mentioned and potentially shown on broadcast before and during and after this specific showdown. But yeah, I just think Optic on paper is the better roster, and they should be able to take this one.
For sure. I think that about does it. I don't know if we have anything else. I'm kind of just scrolling through Twitter to see if we missed anything because we're right under an hour. But yeah, I think we pretty much covered it. I very much appreciate you guys all listening or watching the podcast. It has been incredible. I actually had a listener reach out on Twitter and DM me and say how much he enjoyed the last episode. I think our last YouTube video has like 90 or 100 views, which has been very cool to see, and the podcast listens have been up. We obviously Spotify Wrap just came out like last week or something like that, and they do the same thing for podcasts through Spotify. And I think our listens were up by like 90% in 2023, which is very cool, very humbling to see how much support we're getting from all of you guys. So thank you very, very much for your support throughout this entire year and throughout this entire off season, because I know it was a long one. We didn't have a lot to talk about at times, but we tried to make do, and we're finally at the CDL season. So hopefully things will pick up. We'll actually have consistent topics to talk about. People will be trash talking on Twitter, making little faces in the camera after games, just something so we can talk about these games. And we'll actually get to see how these teams look in the server after just saying, we think they look good on paper, but I don't think they look very good on paper, but we'll finally get some question or some answers to those questions we've been having. So yeah, make sure to subscribe or like or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, YouTube as well. If you want to watch the live stream, you can go to twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast, or you can watch it on our YouTube channel as well. The VOD is also up there every single week. Make sure to follow us on Twitter. He is at jbink with 2Ks. I am at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. The next show should be this time next week, so I'm probably doing the live show on Tuesday, December 12th. But it's easier just to follow the podcast feed or subscribe to the YouTube channel to get it as soon as we upload it, or follow the Twitch channel. And I think you automatically get an email when we go live on Twitch. So that is another way to follow up and keep up to date with our live streams and our podcasts. But I think that about does it for me. Bank, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for all the support. Definitely really cool to hear somebody reached out to you like that. That means a lot, and appreciate any support, criticism, feedback you guys have always. Excited to get back into this season, and now that we're in the swing of things with matches, I'm really looking forward to having stuff to watch and actually be able to talk to you guys about things we watch and pick up from the games and all that good stuff. So looking forward to it. Thanks for the support, and we'll see you right back here next week. Should be back in the swing of things with, regular matches. Obviously, holidays coming up at the end of this month, so we might take a break there, and there will be a break between the first couple of weeks of the Major 1 qualifiers and before they restart before Major 1 at the end of January. So just stick with us whenever we have our shows and let us know what you think. But yeah, thank you guys as always, and remember to send the chow.